this congregation now meets at St. Andrew's. And I have been going there for this last little while. I think that whatever the story is in Toronto needs to be told. It needs Greg, or another Greg, to find out what the truth is behind the story of Japanese Canadian Anglicans in Toronto. He's found out, and thankfully he's arrived, and so he'll be able to tell us about what happened yesterday and the work that was involved in that amazing work that he did, for which I told everybody we are deeply grateful, and none of us could have done it. So I'm going to ask Greg now to come up and tell us a little bit about that journey and about what happened last night. And what I'd like to ask is that if there are any people that want to join with the very few of us that are here, there's Marion and Eddie and me, and we want to be part of the work of reconciliation, connecting with Greg's and their group and Lynn and Greg are both the delegates that came from Vancouver. We want to find out what happened to the 1500. That's a big work. So if you'd like to join us with that, please indicate that. Marion is going to be handing out a piece of paper. She would like to have your emails and phone numbers so that if you're interested, we can be connected with you. And if you're interested in working with us, just put a little check mark there so we can contact you and get together and just carry on. Greg.
Thank you, Joy. And thank you all for coming today. It's a real pleasure to be here in Toronto. Lynn and I came in on Tuesday and Wednesday. We call our journey a journey of justice. And before you can go on a journey of justice, of course, there needs to be an injustice. And in the case of our journey, the injustice was not the exile of 22,000 Japanese Canadians in 1942. Of course, that was a great injustice. But our journey of justice was the injustice against 1,500 of those 22,000. The 1,500 Japanese Canadian Anglicans who were exiled. And it was those 1,500 Japanese Canadian Anglicans who were dispossessed of their churches by the Diocese in Westminster, and nobody knew. There was a code of silence around it. People asked questions, but the only answer they could get is that the churches were relinquished. And that became the title of our work, Relinquished. And our work really became the story of the 3 R's. Relinquished being the first one, which of course is a code. It's a code word for churches being sold without permission, without knowledge, in secret. The second R was, why was that done? What was the intention of the executive of the Diocese of Westminster in secretly selling those churches and then dispossessing those 1,500 Japanese Canadians of the funds? What was their intention? What was the injustice there? And we were able to prove irrefutably, to the extent that the bishop made the statement, that it was done because of racism. Now, racism is a hard thing to prove, but we were able to prove irrefutably with the agreement of our diocese that these churches were sold for reasons of racism, so that even if the Japanese Canadians did come back, they would have nothing to come back to. And I think that was the hardest part of our journey of justice, was to uncover that truth. Because that is an ugly, ugly truth, isn't it? You may expect that from the government of Canada when they're fighting a war, but do you expect that from your church? that the children of Christ would be denied a place to come back to. We were fearful when we made that discovery. It was almost too great a truth for us. And we had to go to our bishop and say, we don't know what to do with this. This is too great a truth. You know, the reputation of the church is at risk here. And our bishop, God bless his soul, he just gave us 5 words. He gave us permission to go on by saying these 5 words, Greg, and it was Father John Shizawa, Lynn's husband, and I who were co-chairing this initiative, and he said to us in the privacy of his office, he said, Greg and Father John, be fearless with the truth. Be fearless with that truth, as ugly as it is, that we need to learn from that truth so that it will not happen again. Because racism, of course, still exists in our society. It still exists in our church. So that was the second R, and that was a difficult door to walk through. Because who wants to, in our church, accuse the bishop of being a racist? You certainly couldn't have done it in the 40s. You certainly couldn't have done it in the 80s even. But in this millennium, we were given permission by our bishop to call a past bishop a racist, to call his executive council racist, to call dispossessing 1,500 Japanese Canadian Anglicans in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, to dispossess them over that long period of time and be able to call it racist, to be able to shout out that it's racism, not to hide it, as we often do with that ugly R word, don't we? Let's just pretend that elephant in the room is not there. It was incredibly liberating for our team. And now, what we did last night, well, actually, let me go to the third R, and then I'll go to last night. How much time do I have, Joy? I'll try to be brief. The third R was then, so we have churches that are sold without permission. We discovered that it's racist, that we had a racist bishop, and so what do you do with that? Do you wallow in self-pity? Do you accuse the dispossessor? Or, in our Christian faith, what do? We embark upon a ministry of reconciliation. That's what you do with it. It's healing, it's healthy, it's faith-based. And that is really where we're at, having discovered the truth, having broken this code of silence. Don't talk about it. Don't call it racism by any stretch of the imagination. Having been given permission to say those ugly, ugly things, and that's part of the healing process, isn't it? Embrace the truth, ugly or not. And then don't wallow in that, but move on. Work on your reconciliation. We are all children of God. And as children of God, what do? We embrace the light and we try to reconcile. And we are at that stage now. Last night we made our presentation. 3 years ago we had our bishop apologize to 16 of those 1,500, 16 Japanese Canadian Anglicans at Diocesan Synod at the annual event where there was 350 people from our church there. And the bishop personally apologized. He walked away from the microphone and he went in front of 16 Japanese Canadians over here like this. And he spoke for about 3 minutes, a heartfelt apology. Eye to eye. No barrier in between, no podium to hide behind, just I am sorry. Last night was 3 years of very hard work to then move beyond just Vancouver, where they all came from, where the 1,500 originated, but then to move beyond to where the 1,500 went. Where did they end up? The congregation that Joy was just talking about. How do we reach them? Joy's brother, Canon Tim Nakayama, from the day we started, he was our prophet in many ways. And in the first 2 months of our project, he said, you have to remember, Greg, eventually you have to go national with this story. The Ministry of Reconciliation is not local to the Diocese of New Westminster. the ministry of reconciliation and healing and catharsis is for those 1,500 Japanese Canadian Anglicans who are now spread across the country. Said that, and 3 years after we got an apology from Bishop Michael, we finally fulfilled Prophet Tim's plea with us, and that's to go national. Get outside of the diocese that dispossessed those 1,500, that sold their churches, that stole their money. And that's what we did last night, with the help of a great man, Jim Boyles, good friend of Joy's, who opened doors for us and made it possible to go in front of the national church, to go in front of the primate and tell our story. 3 of us told the story. Lynn, I assume Lynn was introduced earlier, was she? Was Lynn introduced earlier? Yes. So Lynn and Joy and myself made that presentation to representatives from all of the dioceses in our Anglican church, our national church. There was probably 60 people there, and the primate. So we told the ugly story of the churches being sold, the money being diverted, the 1,500 being dispersed, and the story of racism, which is the reason it happened. And the primate brought tears to all of our eyes. I called my wife when it was over in Vancouver, and she started to cry on the phone. It was a very cathartic moment, the words that the primate applied. Deeply felt remorse, and the words that stuck in my mind is when he said, I personally stand side by side with Bishop Michael Ingham and his apology of 3 years ago, his apology for dispossessing the 1,500 Japanese Canadian Anglicans, for stealing their money, and supporting you fully on the process now, the next phase of what we're trying to do, national reconciliation, telling the story nationally so that people know the story, so that their mothers, their fathers, their grandfathers, those 1,500 that have passed away, that we felt so many of them are with us last night, and that many of them might be your fathers, your grandfathers, your grandmothers, that the story needs to be told. If you've been to Jerusalem, there's a place called Yad Vashem, and it means a name and a place. And every Jew that was killed in the Second World War by the Nazis, they've tried to capture the history of every single one of those. There was 6 million. So in a way, Yad Vashem is our next phase, to find out about your mothers and your fathers and your grandfathers, all those who were dispossessed of their churches. And that is the focus of what we've been doing, not the 22,000, not the 1,421 properties that were sold by the government in the Second World War, but 3 church properties. But most importantly, the living communities in those 2 churches, those 1,500 Japanese Canadian Anglicans. The church and diocese of New Westminster couldn't call them Anglicans. They called them Japanese Christians, but they were Japanese Canadian Anglicans. So if you can offer us your prayerful support, and we do hope we'll be back and that we can tell this story in many communities. The remnant, I hope, is not a rude word to use, but there is a remnant. And we want to tell your story to the remnant. So thank you so much for being here today. And Joy, thank you for the opportunity to talk. God bless you all.